Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Spider-Man Commander deck techs. The Spider-Man set has a huge number of legendary creatures, so I wanted to showcase some of the coolest commander options from among them. I'm releasing a new Spider-Man Commander deck every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Spider-Man Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Kraven the Hunter. Born to Russian aristocrats, Sergei Kravenov is a big game hunter who's designated Spider-Man as the most dangerous, if not the biggest, game. He prefers to fight barehanded and lives by a personal code, seeking to defeat his prey fairly, whatever the writer decides that means. He's also a founding member of the Sinister Six, so see the video's description for my Doc Ock deck of that same theme. I'm excited to show you what I cooked up for Kraven, but before we get into the deck tech, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build around my commander. I want to show off why they're cool, why I put them in the command zone, and what they want me to do. So whatever it is they do want me to do, I put 30 cards toward that. It's my game plan. It's what we try to do at the table, and how do we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers just to clear the board if we need to. Sometimes I'll run more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, but I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I always hit my land drops and I can cast my spells. So let's talk about our commander. Kraven the Hunter is a 4/3 legendary human warrior villain for 1, a black and a green. Kraven has trample, and whenever a creature an opponent controls, with the greatest power among creatures that player controls, dies, draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Kraven the Hunter. So this card seems, at least on the surface, like a great marriage of flavor and functionality. As I understand him, while Kraven is usually framed as a villain, he's really just a guy who takes his hobby way too seriously. Know anyone like that? He wants to take down the biggest, scariest targets he can find, and when they're finally beaten, he gets stronger and more savvy, ready for his next hunt. I think it's interesting that his ability doesn't seem to care about Kraven being the one to defeat the strongest creature. He just wants to see them die. He learns from their death either way. Maybe this is just a way to make a rare creature in Magic more viable in play, but I think it goes beyond that. I think this is representative of the fact that while Kraven is often the one to deal lethal damage to an opponent's creature, it's only because we, the player, have set him on their scent. Other times, we're causing those creatures to die on our own, with Kraven rewarding us for the kills. In other words, we're the hunter, and Kraven is like our mentor. That's why I built the deck the way I did. I've put serious emphasis on power mattering, especially when it comes to creatures with greater power than any other. When those creatures die, we have ways to generate value beyond just the lessons that Kraven teaches us. And we follow his code of fair fights. So each of the humanoid creatures in our deck has lesser power than Kraven, of course for fear of challenging him. And each of our non-humanoid creatures is a big monster to inspire his hunting instinct, and ours as well. We're heavy on removal and ramp, respectively, to shape our threats that our commander engages with, and to ensure he's victorious each time. We aren't just about enemy creatures, of course. Our opponents are the real most dangerous game. So we have ways to neutralize our threats, or their threats rather, and ways to evade their defenses. I especially like the interaction between our Death Touch effects and Kraven's Trample ability, as what's deadlier than a hunter who kills creatures and players alike in a single blow? After he hits the battlefield, we swing in every turn, clearing his path before he strikes. He feints, jukes, and finally pounces, and his experiences grow him as well as our hand. Our spells that take out creatures on each opponent's playmat make our commander surge with power, and we can back him up as he plants his flag atop the mountain of which he's made himself king. We follow in his footsteps, treading carefully and killing ruthlessly, all the while learning how feeble our opponent's threats are when we topple their champions each turn. And when at last our fingers curl around our final opponent's throat, and they stammer in surprise at how we broke through their defenses and made them into prey, we'll be able to answer their unspoken question of how or why we did this with a single, simple answer. It's hunting season. You'll enjoy this deck if you like playing with a side quest in mind, that is to ensure your commander is always the strongest creature in play, or if you like feeling like the bigger someone's board gets, the more satisfying it is to take them down. So that covers us talking about our commander. As usual, this Moxfield list is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, below the list itself, there is a considering section. It's full of cards that I thought about including and ultimately decided not to, but you sure could if your budget is different than mine, if you want to go in a different direction or focus on a different sort of thing than I did. It's a good place for you to get started if you also want to build Kraven the Hunter. So we're going to start with our first part of our game plan, which is the greatest power. We've got 27 cards in this section, but we have other cards in the game plan, of course, so don't worry about us getting our 30. We're going to start with Strength Testing Hammer from Unfinity. This is a 1 generic mana equipment that equips for 3 that says whenever the equipped creature attacks, we roll a 6-sided die. That creature gets +X+O until end of turn, where X is the result of the die roll. And then, if it has the greatest power or is tied for the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield, we draw a card. So a lot of the time, Strength Testing Hammer is we roll a d6 and we get that as Kraven's power bonus, and then we draw a card in addition. It's just free pump every turn, and often free card draw as well, for pretty cheap. Next we have Extract a Confession. 1 and a black for a sorcery that says each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. And if evidence was collected, instead each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. And it says, as an additional cost to cast it, we may collect evidence 6, which means we exile cards with a total mana value of at least 6 from our graveyard. So this is 2 mana to make each opponent sacrifice a creature. And as long as we had at least 6 mana value of cards in our graveyard to exile, it has to be the biggest creature each opponent had. Either way, however, this is one of the edict effects that we have that makes every opponent lose a creature, which means Kraven is going to see each opponent lose a creature, and if it's the greatest power, whether it's because we collected evidence or because, the only creatures they had were all 2/2s, well, that's the greatest power among the creatures they control, so we're going to get the value from Kraven. Because it doesn't specifically call out that the creature that dies is the greatest power among creatures that player controls or tied for the greatest power. You don't have to specify the tie. It's still the greatest if they are tied. So yeah, collect evidence. Oh, we're in the wrong place. There we go. Extract a Confession, pardon me. Is great for us to just get rid of some things, and even if this only kills the greatest powered creature on one person's mat, that still draws us a card and puts a counter on Kraven. But if we're able to collect evidence with it, we're guaranteed to get 3 counters and 3 cards from this. That's pretty good for 2 mana. Next is Inscription of Abundance. 1 and a green for an instant with Kicker for 2 and a green. So if we kick it, it costs 3 and double green. It says choose 1. If the spell was kicked, we choose any number instead, and usually we will choose all 3. The options we have are to put 2 1/1 counters on a creature we control. That's Kraven. It's for someone, a player, probably us, to gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures they control. So again, that's going to be us. And target creature we control fights target creature we don't control. So it's worth noting that these first 2 abilities don't say it has to be anything of ours, like the last one does. A creature we control fights a creature we don't control. So we can, if we were to kick this, or even if not, play this politically. We could put 2 counters on someone else's creature. If we've made a deal with them to do so, we could have them gain life based on the biggest creature on their battlefield, which is a little thematic for us. But really what we want to do is make Kraven bigger, gain life equal to his now slightly bigger power, and have him fight something. And then we swing in. And if he fought the biggest thing, we also get another counter on him and draw a card from his trigger. Next is Merkel's Edict. This is from the Baldur's Gate set. 1 and a black for a sorcery that says roll a d20. If you roll a 1 to a 9, we choose an opponent, and they sacrifice a creature of their choice. If we roll a 10 to 19, each opponent sacrifices the creature of their choice. And if we roll a natural 20, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. So we get a pretty similar effect to Extract a Confession, which is what we want from these kind of edict effects. It might end up that we only kill 1 creature, but that still might be the biggest creature on that particular opponent's playmat. And if that's the case, it will trigger Kraven. And then, of course, just like Extract a Confession, if we get the 10 to 19, we might be able to get at least one trigger out of that anyway. And if we don't, we're still clearing the way for Kraven to come swing in. Next is Bouncer's Beatdown. 2 and a green for an instant that costs 2 less if it targets a black permanent. Bouncer's Beatdown deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control, and if that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. So this is 3 mana for us to have Kraven, most likely, bite a creature or a planeswalker. So we can't go face with this, which is alright, but if that creature or planeswalker happens to be black, it only costs us 1 green for this, and it's at instant speed. So what's nicest about this is we can cast this after we've already attacked and been blocked. So let's say Kraven's power is still at a 4, we'll say, and they block us with a 3/3. And that 3/3 is black, let's say. Or even if it's not. If it's black, this will cost us a single green. If not, it'll cast us the 2 and a green. But either way, we can have Bouncer's Beatdown deal 4 damage, Kraven's power, to the blocker. The blocker dies, and now Kraven tramples over entirely all of his power to whatever we were attacking, whether it's a creature or a player or a planeswalker. So yeah, Bouncer's Beatdown is a great bite spell that really helps our trampling commander and gets better and better, the beatdown it does, that is, as our commander gets better themselves, gets bigger. Next we have Consumed by Greed, 1 and double black for an instant that lets us gift a card. We may promise an opponent a gift as we cast a spell, and if we do, they will draw a card before the rest of the spell's effects. So we don't have to gift this card, but we want to, because it says target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, and if the gift was promised, we return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. We're not running that many creatures in this deck other than Kraven, because Kraven wants to be the biggest and the best. So it's nice that we can run Consumed by Greed and ensure that we're going to get a trigger from Kraven for just 1 and double black, and getting rid of our opponent's biggest, scariest creature, the one with the greatest power. But if it turns out Kraven has died, or one of our other creatures has died and we want to get it back, we can always give our opponent a card to raise dead that. Next is Essence Harvest. 2 and a black for a sorcery that says target player loses X life, and we gain X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. Sometimes this might just win us the game. We are trying mostly to win with with commander damage with Kraven, because he's just going to get bigger and be able to trample over and get up to 21 on somebody. But we're not the only fighter at the table. And if a player is able to get down to a life total that's below or at or below Kraven's power, this is a sorcery that just kills that player and gives us more life that we can use to take some hits of our own if we need to. Next we have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. 1 and double green for a 2/3 legendary elf scout that says whenever another creature enters, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. So the hope here is that we can play Selvala on turn 3 and then our commander on turn 4, or maybe faster than that, and that our commander will be able to draw us a card. And then, Selvala, if we put a green into her and tap her, she adds X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. The idea here is, if we tap Selvala and a green source, we want to be the one who always makes the most mana at the table, because we're also not giving anyone else any other card draw, because no one else is going to have a creature enter with power greater than each other creature's power, which is to say Kraven. We want Kraven to always be the biggest, so Kraven gets the draw, no one else ever does. And we tap for an awful lot of mana thanks to Selvala. Next is Soul Shatter. We've got to put Soul Shatter in the deck. 2 and a black for an instant, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. So the planeswalker clause in here, it does trip us up a little bit. The opponent gets to choose what they're sacrificing if they have creatures and or planeswalkers of the same mana value, tied for the greatest. So they could choose to, sacrifice a 5 mana planeswalker versus a 5 mana creature. But yeah, now this is not actually asking for greatest power, it's asking for greatest mana value, but oftentimes this is going to be similar. Power is going to scale, at least on a lot of people's boards. And even if not, we're getting the thing that's most valuable out of the way, and that's still pretty good. Triumph of Ferocity is next. 2 and a green for an enchantment. It's not an aura, it just sits on the battlefield for us and says at the beginning of our upkeep, we draw a card if we control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power. So great. Also, we get to see Liliana. Love Liliana. Tyvar the Pummeler is next. Tyvar is the only warrior in this deck besides our commander. Notable later. 1 and double green gives us a 3/3 legendary elf warrior that says if we tap an untapped creature we control, Tyvar gains indestructible until end of turn, and then we tap him. So the reason we would want to do that is if Tyvar is, let's say, blocking, for example. We can make Tyvar indestructible. Or if we've attacked with Tyvar and we have another untapped creature, tapping Tyvar is part of the effect of this ability, not part of the cost. So Tyvar can still have this ability activated even if he is already tapped. So this is pretty nice, but for 3 and double green, we can give all of our creatures +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. This is, for our commander, an overrun effect, It lets us get a power and toughness bonus equal to our commander's power. He already has trample, so it's just going to make him very big. And because we can do this at instant speed and can do it over and over, since it's an ability of a permanent, we're going to be able to use this to kill an awful lot of things and be able to trample in for an awful lot of damage. Next, from the Tarkir Dragonstorm commander decks, it's Will of the Abzan. 3 and a black for a sorcery that says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both instead. Which means when we put Will of the Abzan on a stack, if somebody responds to it by killing our commander, then we still get to choose both because we control the commander as we cast it, not necessarily as it resolved. So it lets us choose either any number of target opponents, each sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls, and they lose 3 life. Or we return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. It does target, so because we have to choose the target when we put Will of the Abzan on the stack, we cannot put it on the stack, then have somebody respond with killing Kraven, then it resolves, and we've chosen this mode already, and we get to choose Kraven in the graveyard, because Kraven would not have been in the graveyard when we put the Will of the Abzan on the stack, so we couldn't have targeted him there. But a nice little bonus for us. Next is Big Horner Rancher from the Fallout decks. 4 and a green for a 2/5 human ranger with vigilance that says tap to add an amount of green mana equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. I'm sure you can get the theme of this section. But also, we can sacrifice the Big Horner, Big Horner Rancher, this guy, to gain life equal to the greatest toughness among other creatures we control. So pretty sweet that even with our commander not out, Big Horner Rancher taps for 2 because it doesn't say the greatest power among other creatures you control for tapping for mana, but it does say other creatures for gaining life. However, because our commander, we're mostly focused on his power, but it's usually increasing alongside his toughness. So if we needed to gain more life, we could, at instant speed, sacrifice the Rancher and get an awful lot of life from our commander, being so big. Garruk Primal Hunter is a Planeswalker. For 2 and triple green, we get a legendary Planeswalker, Garruk, that comes in with 3 loyalty. For +1, we can make a 3/3 beast. Seems fine. Nice to have a beast. We want to be able to hunt beasts, obviously. For -3, we can draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, so that's why this is in our section here. And we could do this right when Garruk comes in and just essentially pay 5 to draw cards equal to the power of our commander. But if Garruk gets up to the point where we can ultimate him, for -6, we can create a 6/6 green worm creature token for each land we control. That seems pretty alright. Make a whole bunch of worms. I like the idea of Kraven being surrounded by a whole bunch of worms, and they're just like, nope, you go ahead, buddy. You are the attacker. We'll just stay back and block. Next, from Brothers War Standard. If you played during Standard, while Brothers War was legal, you remember Gix's Command. For 3 and double black, we get a sorcery that lets us choose 2. Either we put 2 1/1 counters on up to 1 creature and it gains lifelink until end of turn. We destroy each creature with power 2 or less. we return up to 2 creature cards from our graveyard to our hand, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. So what we're trying to do here is this last one. We probably also want to do this first one. So our commander gets a little bit bigger and gains lifelink, because when this happens, our commander is going to gain a counter and we're going to draw a card for each of the creatures that got sacrificed. So we're getting not just these 2 counters up here, but counters for each of our opponents down here. If we have 3 opponents, that means our commander's just gotten 5 1/1 counters and lifelink until end of turn. So probably pretty good. But if we need to bring some creatures back from the graveyard or to destroy some little creatures, we've got that too. Next is Monstrous Onslaught. 3 and double green for a sorcery that says it deals X damage divided as we choose among any number of target creatures, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control as we cast this spell. So the as we cast this spell bit is the same as we saw a little bit ago for Will of the Abzan. This is just a nice removal spell. We get to take Kraven's power and sort of divide it up in the form of damage to any number of creatures, which will hopefully clear the way for us, or at the very least, we can mark damage on creatures, and then if our opponent decides to block with them, we're likely to kill those creatures no matter how they block, because we're going to have such a large power. In a way, this is us doubling damage for our commander and just distributing it among creatures. So it forces our opponent to either say, do you want to lose these creatures and also probably have some damage trample over to you, or do you just want to take the full amount of our commander's power in damage to you and save your creatures? Next we have Overwhelming Stampede. Gotta run this one. 3 and double green for a sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. That is what we've seen already on Tyvar, of course. Tyvar gives us that same thing for the same cost, except he doesn't give all of our creatures trample. But because we're really only trying to attack with our commander, who already has trample, it ends up being the same thing. So a nice little redundancy. Even though we can do it multiple times on Tyvar, Tyvar can also himself be removed. So yeah. Next is Zot's Will. 4 and a black for an instant that says choose one. Again, if you control a commander, as you cast a spell, you may choose both instead. Either each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power, or exile all opponents' graveyards, then create X 0/1 black Thrall creature tokens, where X is the greatest power among creature cards exiled this way. So again, we care about the greatest power and the greatest power. And if we do this when our commander's out, we're going to be able to get 3 triggers, assuming 3 opponents, and then make a whole bunch of little tokens to chump block while our commander is doing his hunting job. Next we have Thickest in the Thicket. 3 and double green for an enchantment that says when it enters, we put a number of 1/1 counters equal to a creature's power on that creature. So we just get to double our commander's power, and of course boost his toughness as well, because these are counters. And at the beginning of our end step, we draw 2 cards if we control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power. So we get to just, get an awful lot out of this. Traverse the Outlands. Love to put this in any green deck with big creatures. 4 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Put those cards on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this is a great way for us to, a lot of the time, just search our library for the rest of the basics we have in it, and just put them in play tapped. So nice ramp for us. Next is Lifestream's Blessing. 4 and double green for an instant that says draw X cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you controlled as you cast a spell, and if it was cast from exile, you gain twice X life. And it has Foretell for 4 and a green. Foretell means while this is in our hand, we can pay 2 generic mana and exile it face down, and then on a later turn, we can cast it for its Foretell cost of 4 and a green. So a nice thing for us to be able to do, especially if this is in our opening hand, we can just go ahead on turn 2 and pay the 2 generic, exile this face down, and it's just going to sit there until we've got 5 mana and our commander is pretty big. Once that happens, we will draw cards equal to our commander's power and gain life equal to twice that power for 5 mana. Seems good to me. Next we have Professor Onyx, another Liliana. For 4 and double black. we have a legendary planeswalker, Liliana, who has Magecraft, which is to say whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. We are running 27 cards that qualify for that. She's got 5 loyalty, and her +1 is we lose 1 life and we look at the top 3 cards of our library, put 1 in our hand, the rest in our graveyard. So a nice little bit of card advantage for us. For -3, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. If you look at it the right way with our commander in play, this means each opponent loses their biggest creature, we draw 3 cards, and our commander gets 3 counters. So we probably want to do this whenever our opponents aren't just, they don't just have boards full of little creatures. Once they've got something threatening enough to be a threat to us, we want to be able to -3 Professor Onyx. And if Professor Onyx happens to get up to 8 loyalty, we can -8 her to make each opponent, to put each opponent in a situation where they may discard a card, and if they don't, they lose 3 life. And we do that 7 times total, 6 more times. They have to discard a card or lose 3 7 times, and that's each opponent. Pretty sweet. That could kill people. Next is Rishkar's Expertise. 4 and double green for a sorcery that says draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. As you can see, we have a lot of sorceries that for 5 or more mana draw a bunch of cards, as our commander's already doing, but giving us these options is usually pretty great, especially when Rishkar's Expertise says we can cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. So this isn't just draw a bunch of cards for 6 mana, it's also cast something for free. Next we have Season of Gathering. 4 and double green for a sorcery that gives us 5 paw prints worth of modes. We can choose the same mode more than once. Of our 5 paw prints, for one of them we can put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control and it gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. For 2 paw prints we can choose artifact or enchantment and destroy every permanent of that chosen type. And for 3 paw prints we can draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. So even if we do this to spend 6 mana to put 5 counters on our commander and give him vigilance, and he already has trample, that's still pretty alright. But being able to destroy every artifact or every enchantment in play, that can certainly hurt us, but we are only going to choose that if it hurts our opponents worse. And we might just draw cards and put 2 counters on our commander and give them vigilance. Seems okay to me. Next we have Shadowgrange Archfiend. For 6 and a black, we get an 8/4 demon that says when it enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. We gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures sacrificed this way. So we gain a bunch of life, we draw 3 cards, we put 3 counters on our commander, we get all the good stuff. But also, Shadowgrange Archfiend has Madness for 2, a black, and 8 life, which means if we have to discard this card, which, for example, we might if we are going to our cleanup step. If we have to discard Shadowgrange Archfiend to clean up because we have so many cards in hand, when we do, it has Madness, so it will be discarded into exile, and at that moment we can cast it for its Madness cost, or we can just put it in the graveyard. So we don't have to pay the Madness cost, but we might as well, because we've drawn a bunch of cards, let's say with Rishkar's Expertise or Season of Gathering. We don't have enough mana to pay for all of them, but we do have 2 and a black that we can hold up. We go to our end step, we pass to cleanup, we discard Shadowgrange Archfiend and whatever other cards we need to discard. When we do, it has Madness, so we pay the 2 and a black, we pay 8 life, and then it will enter. It'll go to the stack, of course, and if it resolves, it will enter, and all of this will happen, and we'll probably gain our life back, at least some of it. Plus, our commander is going to trigger a bunch of times because everyone's sacrificing their biggest creatures. Plus, we're left with an 8/4 that no one expected us to have after our end step. Next is Shriekwood's Devourer. 5 and double green for a 7/5 tree folk with trample. Love to see a big trampling creature. Whenever we attack with 1 or more creatures, we untap up to X lands, where X is the greatest power among those creatures. So attacking with our commander oftentimes means we untap all of our lands. So this is a great way for us to cast our spells prior to combat and know we're going to be able to get some value out of it because we'll have plenty of lands to cast later spells with after combat. Especially if the spells we cast before combat are edict effects that are killing our opponent's greatest creatures with the greatest power, to put more cards in our hand that we can then cast post-combat. finally we have the Skullspore Nexus. 6 and double green for a legendary artifact that costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. Whenever one or more non-token creatures we control die, we make a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness each equal to the total power of those creatures. So if our commander dies when his power is 8, let's say, we get an 8/8 fungus dinosaur. And for 2 and tap, we can activate the Skullspore Nexus's ability to double target creature's power until end of turn. This is particularly sweet. I kind of don't even care about the dinosaur, although it's nice to have a blocker once our commander is removed or once one of our big creatures is removed, because we have trample on our commander. So if our commander has gotten up to 8 power, like I suggested, and our opponent says, you know what, you've already done like 5 commander damage to me, I can take another 8 before I deal with you, I just gotta wait until I untap. We can say, okay, and they go past blockers, we're not blocked, they think we're going to do 8 damage to them, we activate the Skullspore Nexus, double our commander's power, we do 16 damage, and they're just dead. Oh, with that 5 that we had already supposed they might have. Probably they won't do that because Skullspore Nexus is on the battlefield and they're going to know we have that, but sometimes people forget. Or this is a great way for us to say, all right, our commander's power is 8 and you're blocking, well, we're still going to do a bunch of commander damage to you because we're going to pump it to 16 by doubling it with the Skullspore Nexus. All right, that covers our greatest power tagged cards. We're going to talk about the other cards for which power matters. Skullspore Nexus fits that tag, but we've put it in the other one because it cares about the greatest power among the creatures that die. So anyway, next we have Conformer Shuriken. 2 generic mana for a legendary equipment that equips for 2, and it gives equipped creature the ability, whenever this creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. And if that creature has greater power than this creature, put a number of 1/1 counters on this creature equal to the difference. So this means if we equip this to Kraven, and Kraven attacks one of our opponents that has a bigger creature than Kraven, that has more power than Kraven has, we just tap that creature down and put counters on Kraven equal to the difference in their powers. So if someone says, haha, I have Galta Primal Hunger, we can just attack, tap down Galta with his 12 power, or her 12 power rather, and put 8 counters on Kraven, making Kraven the same power as Galta. And that just sets us up to do even more damage to them because this is going to be the best creature they have. You know, we're not going to use this ability to tap down a creature that doesn't have the greatest power our opponents control. So yes. Next we have Evasion Caryatid. 1 and a green for a 1/1 plant that taps for 1 mana of any color. It's a mana dork. But if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we add 2 mana of any 1 color instead. And our commander has base power of 4. So Evasion Caryatid is going to help us get our commander out faster, and once our commander's out, it's going to help us cast all the other spells we need to cast, which is good because we do have a little bit of a heavy curve in this deck, just because so many of the spells that care about a lot of power or the greatest power among creatures our opponents control tend to cost 5 mana or more. So next is Fight Rigging, which I love from Streets of New Capenna. For 2 and a green, we get an enchantment with Hideaway 5, which means when it enters, we look at the top 5 cards of our library, we exile one of them face down under Fight Rigging, and we put the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. And at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, and if we then control a creature with power 7 or greater, doesn't have to be the same creature that we targeted with this, we may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So this gives us a free card once we've gotten something, probably our commander, up to 7 power. And it helps our commander get up to 7 power because at the start of combat, we could put a counter on anything. What's especially nice about Fight Rigging is this effect, getting a counter on something at the start of combat, continues to function even after we've cast the card that we hit away with it. Pretty sweet. Next is Mandate of Abaddon, one of our wraths. 3 and a black for a sorcery that says choose target creature you control, destroy all creatures with power less than that creature's power. So in a way, this is sort of the greatest power effect as well. There's a little bit of an overlap there between that and just power matters. So this is us saying We want to kill everything that's not worthy of Kraven's time. If it's something that's the biggest on their battlefield, we're going to be able to get a trigger off of Kraven when it dies, along with everything lower, smaller than it. But if not, we're going to be left with only the things that Kraven wants to fight and wants to kill. And that's pretty good thematics, and also shuts down the token decks that a lot of our opponents may be running. Finally, we have Ghalta Primal Hunger. I mentioned we have a couple of big creatures that are emblematic of what Ghalta would want to fight. Ghalta is 10 and double green for a 12/12 legendary Elder Dinosaur, but Ghalta costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures we control. So that's not just the greatest power among creatures we control. We add up all of our creatures' power, which usually is mostly going to be Kraven. But still, we get to use Kraven. So if Kraven is an 8 power creature at the moment, then Ghalta only costs 4, and we have a 12/12 Trampler to attack, to block, to do whatever we need. Thanks, Ghalta. That covers our Power Matters section. We're going to go now to the last little thing that we care about for Ghalta, which is death triggers. Because Kraven, his ability is a death trigger. When a creature an opponent controls with the greatest power among creatures that player controls dies, Kraven draws us a card and gets a counter. So we have a few other ways for us to get benefits from that. Morbid Opportunist for 2 and a black is a 1/3 human rogue that says whenever one or more other creatures die, we draw a card, only once per turn though. But that doesn't mean only creatures we control. So if we're killing our opponent's creature somehow, once per turn, we're going to be able to draw a card from it. And if it happens on an opponent's turn, we're going to draw a card as well, because it's once each turn, but not only once on each of our turns. So this is also going to trigger when our opponent's creatures die due to something other than us. It's just, as long as they've died, we draw a card. Falkenrath Noble is 3 and a black for a 2/2 flying vampire noble that says whenever this creature or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So a little bit of drain here. A little more incidental life gain for us, but it can reduce an opponent's life total pretty precipitously as we're doing these mass edicts or board wipes, or if we're just attacking with Kraven and killing 1 or 2 things in the process. Similarly, Poison Tipped Archer is 2 a black and a green for a 2/3 elf archer with reach and with death touch that says whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So Poison Tipped Archer doesn't give us any life gain, but Poison Tipped Archer cares about every creature on the battlefield other than itself dying. And as long as it died, every opponent's going to lose a life. This is stronger for us, honestly, than Falkenrath Noble, but Falkenrath Noble does gain us life, and it is a secondary effect for this. I wanted to put Sir Conrad in this deck, but as we know, Sir Conrad has a higher power than Kraven the Hunter, so that wouldn't be appropriate for Kraven. Finally, we have Black Market. It's an enchantment for 3 and double black that says whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on this enchantment. Doesn't matter what creature it is, or who controls it, or when. Charge counter on Black Market. And at the beginning of our first main phase, we add 1 black mana for each charge counter on Black Market. So this is a great way for us to ramp as we're letting these creatures die, or seeing them die, whether to our combats, or our spells, or anyone else's. Just being able to cast all the things that Kraven wants us to cast, as long as we do it during our first main phase. So that covers most of the cards in our game plan. We're going to look now at these sections of support for our game plan, starting with our card advantage section. I have, as usual, tagged card advantage as just draw in this. That doesn't mean all of these cards necessarily draw as cards. It's just a shorthand for card advantage for my tagging purposes. So we've seen Strength Testing Hammer. When the equipped creature attacks, if it has the greatest power or is tied for the greatest power among creatures in the battlefield, we draw a card. Hollow Merc Siege can also draw us cards. It is a black and a green for an enchantment from Dragonstorm that says as it enters we choose Sultai or Abzan. Oftentimes in this deck we're going to choose Abzan, but Sultai is available to us as well depending on what the game plan looks, or the game state looks like at the time we cast this. So Sultai says whenever a counter is put on a creature we control, we draw a card, but only once each turn. So this is really excellent, because if something of our opponents dies and it was the biggest thing they had, Kraven's going to get a counter on it. Hallmark Siege will trigger and we'll draw a card. We've already drawn a card from Kraven though, so this is just doubling up on Kraven's draw trigger. Only once each turn from Hallmark Siege, but still pretty good card advantage. However, if we choose Abzan, whenever we attack, we put a 1/1 counter on a target attacking creature, and it gains menace until end of turn. That seems like it's not as exciting as drawing cards, and that's fair. But adding more counters to our commander and giving him menace, a menace trampler, is so scary, especially if the entire purpose of our deck is to make him bigger and bigger and bigger. So Hallmark Siege is two great effects. We do have to choose one, but depending on what the board state looks like once we play it, of course, like I said, we can find the one that's going to be best for us in the moment and go from there. Next we have Hunter's Talent. This is a class enchantment from Bloombro. For a single 1 and a green, I guess not single, but it's 1 and a green, the way a class works is it will come in and it has this first ability. At sorcery speed, we can pay the cost of its level 2 ability to level it up, and now it has both abilities. And once it's level 2, we can do the same thing with level 3 and pay that cost, and then we'll have all 3 abilities. So level 1 is, when it enters, target creature we control deals damage equal to its power to target creature we don't control. So that's just a nice bite effect. We can kill something, and hopefully it's the biggest power of the creatures that it's controlled or controls, so we'll be able to get a trigger off of Kraven in the process. Level 2 is whenever we attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. Might be relevant for one of our other creatures. Some of our big creatures already have trample, including our commander, but +1/+0, that's something. And then for level 3, at the beginning of our end step, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So just repeatable card advantage during our end step. We've seen Fight Rigging and how it can give us a free spell from Hideaway. That's card advantage. Inspiring Call, that they reprinted in Foundations, is 2 and a green for an instant that says draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So this may be that we're spending 3 mana at instant speed to draw a single card, since it's just 1 card per creature, not per counter. But 3 mana as a way to make our commander indestructible and also get us a card, that's not terrible. We've seen Morbid Opportunist. It gives us the death trigger of drawing a card once each turn. Sylvala can draw us a card if our creatures come in and they're the greatest power among all the creatures on the battlefield. Triumph of Ferocity, of course, draws us cards on our upkeep if we have the biggest creature or tied for the biggest. Garruk Primal Hunter can draw us a bunch of cards based on the power of our biggest creature. Thickest in the Thicket does a similar thing, but it's 2 cards at the end step. Lifestream's Blessing draws us a bunch of cards as well. Professor Onyx, of course, lets us lose a life, look at the top 3, and put one in our hand and the others in the graveyard. And we've seen the other 2 as well. Rishkar's Expertise lets us draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. So does Season of Gathering. Rishkar's Expertise lets us cast one for free if we want to. Both are good. So that covers our card advantage section. Let's look now at Acceleration, which again I've just shorthanded to Ramp. Soul Ring, you know what Soul Ring does. Costs 1, taps for 2. It's so powerful it's worth putting in your deck. Arcane Signet, similarly, costs 2 and taps for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So this is an untapped mana rock that makes whatever 2 colors you're going to need, you want it. Farseek is next. Farseek is 1 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This is the rampant growth we're running in this deck, because we have 2 cards, 2 lands that are dual lands. They have the basic types of both forest and swamp. So Farseek can find either of these swamps. It doesn't matter that they're also a forest. They will come in tapped because that's how Farseek works, but it's a great way to fix our mana and to ramp us up that way. We've seen the Caryatid, how it can tap for 1 or 2 mana. Talisman of Resilience is next. 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for colorless mana, so it's an untapped rock, and it also taps for black or green if we're willing to let it deal 1 damage to us. Which is to say, yeah, we are. If we need this for mana, and just any kind of mana, we can tap it for the colorless mana. If we're desperate for the colored pips, then it's worth 1 damage. And a lot of the time, we're not going to have to use this for the colored mana. But if we do need it, it's worth it to have it. We've seen Selvala and how if we put a green into her and tap her, she can make an awful lot of mana for us. Next is Binding the Old Gods. I love this card from Kaldheim. 2, a black and a green for a Saga enchantment, which means it comes in and immediately gets a lore counter on it and triggers the chapter ability based on the number of lore counters it has. It gets another chapter or another lore counter at the start of our main phase on the next turn and on the turn after that. And once that last ability has resolved, we sacrifice it. So its first ability, which it gets again once it comes in, is destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Really good removal. The second chapter, which is why it's in the acceleration section, is we search our library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. That can be a basic forest, or it can be one of those 2 typed duels that we are running. And finally, creatures we control gain Death Touch until end of turn. Oftentimes when you run Binding the Old Gods, you're running it for the first 2 abilities, but in this deck, Death Touch is really relevant. The reason is, if you haven't seen the interaction between Death Touch and Trample yet, here's the simple way to think of it. Trample means any damage that our commander, we'll just talk about the commander, would deal in excess of our opponent's blockers is dealt to the opponent if we're attacking the opponent. So all we have to do is deal lethal damage to our opponent's blocker or blockers. Lethal damage is, of course, defined by their toughness. And if they have any damage marked on them already, then that plays in as well. But as long as damage is dealt to those creatures that is lethal, every additional point of damage we would deal is dealt to the defending player. It tramples over. What Death Touch does is it makes any amount of damage that a creature with Death Touch deals lethal. So if our commander is still just 4 power and has Death Touch because of Binding the Old Gods, if our commander is blocked, only 1 point of damage needs to be dealt to any blocker for the rest to trample over, because that Death Touch damage is lethal, and that's what Trample cares about, excess damage beyond lethal damage. So if our commander is blocked by 4 creatures, as long as they don't have Indestructible, with 4 power and Death Touch, our commander is doing lethal damage to all 4 of those creatures. If they're blocked by just 1 creature, they only have to do the 1 damage, and the rest of his power will trample over. So Death Touch, we have a little bit of Death Touch in this deck. Binding the Old Gods is a good example of it. Really nice with Trample when it comes to our commander. Next we have Death Sprout. 1 double black and a green for an instant that says destroy target creature, and then Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So this is a really sweet effect. It feels a little expensive because it's Murder, 1 and double black, and Rampant Growth, 1 and a green, together. So that should be a total of 5 mana, but it's actually 4. Still feels a little expensive, but being able to blow up anything we need to at instant speed and Rampant Growth, it's pretty great. Next we have Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsisma. Goreclaw is a 4/3 legendary bear, 4/3 and a green. She says creature spells we cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast, and whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature we control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So the trample doesn't help our commander, but the +1/+1 sure does if we're attacking with Goreclaw as well. In addition, Goreclaw discounts our commander. Even though our commander normally only casts 1 a black and a green, Goreclaw discounts it to just a single black and green. But what if we have to recast our commander? The commander tax is an additional cost. Goreclaw gives a reduction. Additional costs are calculated before reductions are calculated. So if our commander should have to cost 5 mana, the 1, the black and the green, and then 2 additional more for the commander tax, that's a total of 5, 3 of which is generic, and Goreclaw will discount that. So Goreclaw essentially reduces our commander by 1 commander tax increment every time we were to cast it. And if it's the first time we've cast it and Goreclaw's already on the battlefield, it just costs us a black and a green. We've seen the Bighorn Rancher and how it can tap for an awful lot of green mana based on the power of our creatures. Black Market, of course, can eventually give us an awful lot of black mana as the creatures have died. Traverse the Outlands gives us a sort of super rampant growth based on the greatest power among creatures we control. And Shriekwood's Devourer doesn't really ramp us, but it does double the amount of land we're able to tap in a turn, usually because oftentimes our commander is going to have power greater than the number of lands we have, so we can tap all of our lands twice. We don't get to float the mana, but still pretty good. So that covers our acceleration section. Let's talk now about interaction. We have a lot of this because we want things to die, because that's how our commander's ability works. So we start with Collective Resistance. For a 1 and a green, we get an instant with Escalate for a green, which means we choose one of the modes below, and for each mode beyond the first, we pay an extra green. So for 1 and a green, we can destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or give a creature hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this is just Return to Nature, or Naturalize rather. But it also has the ability for us to say, we'll make our commander hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. That's pretty alright. And whichever one of these things we need, if we've got some extra green mana lying around, we might as well pump it in and get 2 or even all 3 of the effects at the same time. We've seen Extract a Confession and how it makes our opponents sacrifice creatures. It's not targeted removal, but an edict effect still works for us, and it could, if we collected evidence on this, get triggers from our commander in the process. Next is Feed the Swarm. 1 and a black for a sorcery that says destroy target creature or enchantment on opponent controls, and we lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. This is fine. If we're getting rid of something that's the biggest on the battlefield, or the scariest enchantment, let's say, doing that in black is pretty great. And being able to just hit anything for 2 mana, as long as we're willing to pay the life, means we should be willing to pay that life. Because this could trigger our commander as well. Fell, very nice. 1 and a black for a sorcery, destroy target creature. That's all it takes. It doesn't cost us life the way that Feed the Swarm does, but it also can't hit enchantments the way that Feed the Swarm can. But this is just a sweet, simple, inexpensive way to hopefully trigger our commander right before we attack with them. Hunter's Talent, of course, is a bite effect when we first have it come in. Inscription of Abundance is also a fight effect if we decide to choose that third mode. Malicious Affliction is next. For double black, we get an instant that says destroy target non-black creature, and it has Morbid. When we cast it, if a creature died this turn already, we can copy Malicious Affliction and choose a new target for the copy. So Malicious Affliction, assuming we've been able to kill anything already, either with a kill spell, maybe with us attacking with our commander, we can get 2 kill spells out of Malicious Affliction, as long as something else has already died. So 1 death becomes 3 with this, as long as what we target is not black. We've seen Merkel's Edict, actually. It's another edict effect, like Extract a Confession. We've seen Bouncer's Beatdown. It's a pretty nice bite effect, based on the damage that we're the greatest power among creatures we control. It is important to recognize that Bouncer's Beatdown is doing the damage itself. It's not the creature doing it, the way that Hunter's Talent is. Consumed by Greed, of course, is another edict, but it hits the things that we want to hit. The greatest power among creatures our target opponent controls. Next we have Royal Assassin. I have so many great memories of Royal Assassin, but I'm using the Dominaria Remastered printing for this. 1 and double black for a 1/1 human assassin creature that just says tap, destroy target tapped creature. So our opponents, without vigilance, have to be super careful about tapping their creatures. If they attack us, we can just Royal Assassin those things away. If they attack us with the biggest thing, or attack one of our opponents with the biggest thing, we can Royal Assassin them away. And that's also worth noting. We can use this politically. It doesn't have to be just to trigger our commander, although that's what we want to do. We can say, look, I see opponent A is attacking you, opponent B. Would you like me to take out one of their creatures? I can do that at instant speed, but if I do, what will you give me for it? So yeah, Royal Assassin, really nice. We've seen Soul Shatter, how it's another edict for each opponent. Binding the Old Gods, of course, destroys a non-land permanent. Death Sprout also destroys a creature. Next we have Make an Example. I love this card from the New Capenna Commander decks. 3 and a black for a sorcery that says each opponent separates the creatures they control into 2 piles, and for each opponent, we choose one of those piles, and each opponent sacrifices the creatures in the chosen pile. Piles can be empty. It's true. So this is really excellent because it's a great way for 4 mana to trigger our commander 3 times. Because each of our 3 opponents is going to put their creatures into piles, and one of those piles is going to contain a creature with the greatest power among the creatures they control, which will die when we choose that pile, and we'll get the triggers off of our commander. The smart thing to do, if you are the opponent, oftentimes, I mean, this is contingent on the situation, but it's to make 2 piles, one of which only contains that strongest creature, and another pile with all your other creatures. So we, the Kraven player, are forced to choose, do we kill a bunch of creatures or just their biggest one? Sometimes we want to just go for the biggest one. But a lot of the time, this is why it's so nice for us, it feels smart for the opponent to say, we're going to just put our biggest creature, our highest power creature in one pile alone and everything else in the other pile. And then we say, okay, we kill everything else. We have other ways to deal with that biggest one. And they feel such a drop in their stomach, like, oh, I thought I made the smartest choice and I did not. But it's also the case that if they have 2 creatures that are tied for highest power, they're going to have to try and separate those creatures out in an appropriate way, and we'll be able to take whatever we want with whichever pile we choose, plus getting our commander triggers. Will of the Absan, we've already seen. It gives us that edict effect and drains players for 3 life. Monstrous Onslaught lets us deal damage divided among creatures we control based on the greatest power among our creatures. Phantom Blade is next. This is another equipment for 4 and a black, so pretty expensive for an equipment. It equips for 2, but it says when it enters, we attach it to up to 1 target creature we control, and we destroy up to one other target creature. So Phantom Blade comes in, snaps on. It auto-equips to our commander, most likely, and then we destroy something else, which is whatever we want, which is probably going to be the creature that our opponent, a creature that our opponent will trigger off of. And Phantom Blade gives our commander +1/+1 and menace. So a little bit more pump and a little bit more evasion for us. We've seen Zot's Will and how, of course, it can edict our opponent's greatest powered creatures. Professor Onyx does the same thing for a single player. Season of Gathering lets us blow up all the artifacts or enchantments on the board. And Shattered Range Archfiend has, again, that edict effect for the greatest power among creatures each opponent controls. So these are our removal spells. This is not a lot of targeted removal. Well, I mean, it is quite a lot of targeted removal, but a lot of non-targeted removal as well. This is just a great way for us to power up our commander and keep them big and keep our hand fat. So we're going to look at our Wraths next. We've already seen them both, but it's worth mentioning. Mandate of Abaddon gives our creatures, we choose our commander, of course, and everything with lesser power dies. Sounds good. And Gix's Command has the ability to destroy each creature with power 2 or less, so that's another Wrath effect for us. So that covers our support sections. We're going to look at the supplemental sections now and take a look at what we have to help out our opponent, or help out our commander's game plan beyond just what we have in the game plan section. Oh, we've already seen Strength Testing Hammer, of course. Helps pump up our commander just whenever it attacks, as long as it is equipped. It is equipped. Agent of the Shadow Thieves is 1 and a black for a legendary enchantment background, which gives an ability to our commander. It says commander creatures we own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It gains Death Touch and indestructible until end of turn. So this means we have to attack the player that has the most life or is tied for the most life among our opponents. It's fine if we have the most life at the table. And if we do that, we get this attack trigger, which will put a counter on our commander and give them Death Touch and indestructible. Indestructible, we don't have to worry about them. Death Touch, we don't really have to worry about what they block with. I've mentioned this on some of my other videos, that it may not be as true for this video, simply because we're trying to win with trampling commander damage, but a lot of the times Death Touch is like Evasion. Because our opponent sees our Death Touching attacker, especially knowing that it's indestructible and knowing it has trample, and says, well, yeah, I could block with some creatures or a creature, but I'm just going to lose that creature, and with their trample and their indestructible, I'm losing that creature for basically no reason other than to reduce the amount of damage I'm taking from the trample by 1. So I'm not going to block at all, which means Yes, we are not killing any of our opponent's creatures in the process, but we are killing our opponent in the process, and that's worth a lot more. We've seen Conformer Shuriken already, and how it can put a bunch of counters on our creature, on the equipped creature, if we tap down something with greater power. Gaia's Gift is next. For 1 and a green, we have an instant that puts a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, and it gains Reach, Trample, Hexproof, and Indestructible until end of turn. So this is an excellent sort of protective spell, as well as a pump spell. And if we haven't attacked yet, and we need to block a flyer, it gains Reach. Why not? We've seen Hollow Siege, and how it can put counters and gain menace to our attacking creatures. Our attacking creature, which is 1. Hunter's Talent, of course, gives +1/+0 when it's level 2 for an attacking creature. Inscription of Abundance can put 2 1/1 counters on a target creature. Next, from the Spider-Man set, we have Strength of Will. 1 and a green for an instant that says, until end of turn, target creature we control gains Indestructible, and whenever this creature is dealt damage, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So Indestructible, of course, protects Kraven, but if we are then blocked, or if we have been blocked before we cast Strength of Will, and then we cast Strength of Will in response to blockers, during the declare blocker step, before damage, that is, Kraven may take a whole bunch of damage, but it won't kill him because he's indestructible. And then when he takes that damage, he gets that many +1/+1 counters, which just get to stick around. I really like Strength of Will. Next, we have Champion's Helm, another equipment. This is 3 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives equipped creature +2/+2. That's all it does. Unless the equipped creature is legendary, which then gives it hexproof. Excellent, excellent way to protect our commander. It's not indestructible, but it keeps them from being targeted, so that seems all right to me. And once we've got this in play, all we have to do is pay 1 to equip it every time, and we just get the +2/+2. Fight Rigging, of course, puts a counter on one of our creatures at the start of combat on our turn. Tyvar can... we can activate Tyvar's ability to give all of our creatures a bonus to power and toughness equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. Goreclaw, when Goreclaw attacks, gives a +1/+1 bonus to every other ferocious creature attacking with Goreclaw. Gix's Command can put 2 counters on something. Phantom Blade gives +1/+1 to the equipped creature. Thickest in the Thicket puts a bunch of counters on a creature when it enters. Season of Gathering can put counters on our creatures. And last, Skullspore Nexus doubles the power of a creature we control. Much like Thickest in the Thicket also doubles that power, but also adds that in the form of counters, so pretty nice. Lots of pump. We've already seen most of them, as you saw. We're going to look now at our Evasion section. These cards we've seen all of as well. Conformer Shuriken taps down, presumably, the biggest creature an opponent controls when we attack them, so we're able to not be blocked by that thing. Gaia's Gift grants Trample, which is evasion. It's not super evasive for our commander, but we're not always attacking with only our commander. Hollow Siege, of course, gives Menace. Hunter's Talent also gives Trample and its 2nd level ability. Again, not relevant for our commander, the same way that Goreclaw gives Trample. Not relevant for our commander, but we have other things. Overwhelming Stampede does give Trample to all of our creatures, so good for everything but our commander, who already has it, so not really bad for them. Phantom Blade grants Menace, and Season of Gathering, again, grants Trample. Those are our evasive spells. Now let's look at our protective spells. We've probably seen a lot of these, but we have at least 3, it looks like, that we have not. So, Agent of Shadow Thieves gives Indestructible when our commander attacks. Bloodthirsty Blade is in this deck, because I figured Kraven likes hunting, so he shouldn't be the only one doing it. For 2 generic mana, we get an equipment that does not have equipped. It doesn't have the equip ability. It just says, for 1 generic mana, attach this equipment to target creature and opponent controls. Do this only as a sorcery. So essentially, for 1 generic, we equip it, but only to a creature on opponent's control. And when we do that, we probably want to hit their biggest, scariest creature. Because what it does is it gives that creature +2/+2, and it becomes goaded for as long as Bloodthirsty Blade is on it. Goaded means that creature has to attack each combat if it's able to, and if it has any choices of player to attack other than us, it has to choose someone other than us. So if we have 3 opponents and we put this on opponent A's creature, That creature has to attack if it's able to, and it has to attack either opponent B or opponent C. Can't attack us while Bloodthirsty Blade is on it. And what's great is, on our turn, since this is only sorcery speed, we can always move the blade to something else if we need to. If we kill the creature that this has been attached to, or it gets killed in combat, either way, this is likely to get blocked by the opponent that the equipped creature is attacking, which means on our next turn we can just put it on something else. And if we put it on the biggest creature, opponent A has, let's say, and then someone kills that creature, we just had an opponent's creature with the greatest power die. So we get to trigger our commander. Collective Resistance, of course, can give Hexproof and Indestructible to a creature. Gaia's Gift can give Hexproof and Indestructible as well as Reach and Trample and a counter. Strength of Will gives Indestructible. Swiftfoot Boots, we gotta have the Swifties. 2 generic mana, equips for 1. It's an equipment that gives Hexproof and Haste. That's all it does. But Hexproof and Haste is pretty great. Hexproof on our commander? Heck yeah. And if it's already in play when our commander comes out, why not have Haste? We've seen Champion's Helm, and for our commander, or any other legendary creature, it gives Hexproof. Ghoulish Impetus is also in this deck for the same reason as the Bloodthirsty Blade. For 2 and a black, this is an aura that enchants a creature, not a creature we control, that says that creature gets +1/+1, Death Touch, and is goaded. And when that creature dies, we return Ghoulish Impetus to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So that means Ghoulish Impetus comes back to the battlefield, and when it does, it's not attached to anything, so we, as its controller, get to attach it to something. So we will attach it to any creature we want on the battlefield. It can be our commander if we want, to give them Death Touch and +1/+1, but then of course they'll also be goaded, which means Kraven would have to attack every turn. We can put this on our own creatures, but we want to put it on our opponent's creatures. And the nicest thing about this, a little quirk of the rules, if a creature has protection, we can't put protection from black or from enchantments, we can't put Ghoulish Impetus on it. But if it has Hexproof or Haste or Ward, we can put it Ghoulish Impetus, not Haste, Hexproof, Shroud, or Ward is what I mean to say. We can still attach Ghoulish Impetus to that creature because attaching it that way, this way, where it just returns to the battlefield, does not target, which is what Shroud, Hexproof, and Ward protect from. So we can put this on anything our opponents have that doesn't have protection from one of the qualities that Ghoulish Impetus has. That's a nice bonus for us, but really we want to remember to put this on the biggest thing our opponents have, because then it's the biggest threat to our other opponents. Next, we've seen Inspiring Call, of course, and how it can give Indestructible to a creature with power, to our creatures, rather, with 1/1 counters on them. And now we have Sereth, the Viper's Fang. I love Sereth. Sereth is a 3/4 legendary human warlock for 2 and double green that says other tapped creatures we control have Death Touch, other untapped creatures we control have Hexproof, and for 1 and tap, we can untap target creature or land we control. So Sereth means that while Sereth is in play, if our commander is attacking and doesn't have Vigilance presently, our commander has Vigilance, or has a Death Touch rather. And while our commander is untapped, our commander has Hexproof, as do all of our creatures. And if we are attacking with Kraven, and someone tries to target Kraven with something, with a kill spell, let's say, we can pay 1 and tap Sereth to untap Kraven. Kraven will no longer have Death Touch, but will now have Hexproof. In addition, we can use this to untap lands of ours, which maybe we need to. Maybe we have, 2 swamps and a forest available to us, and we need 2 green. We can tap the forest, tap a swamp, and use the black mana to activate Sereth to untap the forest, and we've got the other green that we need. So Sereth is really sweet, especially when we use them with a bounce land, which we are running in the deck, and we will see later on in the land section. So that covers our protective section. We have a little bit of recursion as well. We've seen all of these already. We can get a little Raise Dead with our Consumed by Greed if we gift the card. Will of the Abzan, if we choose the second mode, we can bring a creature straight from the graveyard back to the battlefield. And Gix's Command can also return 2 creature cards from our graveyard to our hand. That covers our recursion. So we have synergy. We've seen these synergy cards already. Bloodthirsty Blade and Ghoulish Impetus goad our opponent's creatures, which gives us a way for those things to die. And since we're putting it on our biggest creature, our opponent's biggest creatures, we're likely to get the triggers from our commander once those creatures die, or even the creatures that are blocking them die. And Malicious Affliction cares about us killing other creatures, so we want to be able to do that and get an additional Malicious Affliction to put on the stack. Our last section is our tokens. Just to have a couple of ways to have blockers or additional creatures in play, since our creature count is a little low and we're mostly focusing on our commander. Garrick, of course, can have his +1 ability lets us make 3/3 beasts. Zot's Will lets us make a bunch of black thralls when we exile our opponent's graveyards. And the Skullspore Nexus, even when our creatures die, we're going to make a fungus dinosaur to replace them. So that covers every one of our spells. As usual, we're going to take a look at our land base. We're running 18 basics, 10 forests, and 8 swamps, because we're a little heavier on green. It is pretty even, but a little heavier. We have Bicycle Land, which is to say Festering Thicket is a swamp and a forest. This is one of our typed duels. It enters tapped, but innately it can tap for black or green, and we can pay 2 to cycle it if we want, which is to say, while it's in our hand, if we don't want to play it as a land, we can pay 2 and discard it to draw a card. So a little bit of card draw if we really need to, but also a nice fetchable forest or swamp if we're looking for that. We are running Golgari Rot Farm. It's a bounce land. Bounce lands tap for 2 mana, one of each of these colors. They come in tapped, and when they come in, we have to bounce one of our other lands, or itself, to our hand. We cannot tap it for mana with this trigger on the stack, because of course it comes in tapped. But this is a nice way for us to get a little bit of, it's not really acceleration, but imagine playing a swamp, and then a forest, and then Golgari Rot Farm. You can tap the swamp and the forest before you play this bounce land, get the mana from them, bounce one of those lands, and now you're going to make your land drop next turn because you just put one of your lands back in hand, and you're not even behind on mana because the Rot Farm taps for 2. I really like the bounce lands in Commander. We're running both of the Golgari colored filter lands, Twilight Mire and Viridescent Bog. Viridescent Bog doesn't tap at all unless you put mana into it. But if you put 1 generic into it, it taps for 2. So you're tapping 2 mana sources, Viridescent Bog and whatever else you've tapped, to make 2 mana. So you're not really ramping, but it does fix your colors. Twilight Mire comes in untapped, and it can tap for mana on its own, albeit colorless. And then if we put a green or a black into it, we can tap it to turn that green or a black into 2 black, 2 green, or 1 of each. This is all great, and it's better than Viridescent Bog in every way except one, which is, even though it's got better filtering and can tap for mana on its own, we cannot filter colorless mana into it the way we can with the Bog. The Bog needs any kind of generic mana. Twilight Mire won't filter anything except black or green. So both very nice for us. We are running 5 fixing lands. Of course we're running Command Tower. It is Arcane Signet on a land. It comes in untapped, taps for 1 mana of any color and a commander's color identity. We want to run this, obviously. Path of Ancestry, we also want to run, because it's a tapped land that does the same thing. Comes in tapped, but 1 mana of either black or green. And if we use that mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we get a scry. As I usually mention, our commander shares creature types with himself. So if we use this mana to cast our commander, we're gonna get that scry. We also have 1 other warrior, which is Tyvar, and 5 other humans in the deck. So there are, even though we have a low creature count, other ways for us to get scries off of Path of Ancestry. And in any case, it's just a tap land that taps for our colors. We still want that. We're running Temple of the False God, which is another thing beyond just that bounce land that we might want to use Sereth to untap. This is a land that taps for 2 colorless mana, just like Soul Ring. So it's a soul land. It just does not work at all unless we control 5 or more lands, which means 4 lands besides the temple. Some people don't like Temple of the False God because it feels kind of bad to have it in your opening hand and early on when you're looking for more lands, because it doesn't do anything then. But having a Soul Ring, essentially, that you get as a land drop that just doesn't work early game still means it works the whole rest of the game. That's still 2 mana that one of your lands is making. It's still worth running. I think it's great, especially for the kind of decks that I build. We are also running 2 soft fetches. Riveteer's Outlook is our Evolving Wilds, kind of. Since we don't really care about holding up a land that we can crack for a shuffle, Riveteer's Outlook does it on its own. When it enters, it automatically sacrifices itself, and when it does, we can find a swamp or a forest or a mountain, but we don't have any mountains in the deck. We put that on the battlefield tapped, shuffle, and we gain a life. So a little bit of life gain, just incidental, to us playing this card and immediately being able to find whichever of our basics we need more of. Or, for much slower, we can play Myriad Landscape. It comes in tapped, it taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 tap and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic lands that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 swamps or 2 forests. We put those on the battlefield tapped and we shuffle. So even though this comes in tapped, we have to pay and tap it and sacrifice it to do this thing, and the basics come in tapped themselves, this is 1 land drop that turns into 2 lands in play. So this is ramp. It's just very slow ramp. So it's worth running. We are running a bunch of other dual lands. Llanowar Wastes is a pain land, comes in untapped, and it's the same thing as the Talisman we saw earlier. It taps for colorless or for a black or green if we're willing to have it do a damage to us. So everything I said about the Talisman applies here too. I love the pathways, so we're running one. Darkboar Pathway is an untapped land that taps for black, or you can play it on its backside as Slitherboar Pathway, and it comes in untapped and taps for green. What's nice about this is if we have Pathway early on, let's say we need green mana, so we play it as Slitherboar Pathway. Then we get this bounce land, Golgari Rot Farm, and we play that a little bit later. We can bounce the Slitherboar Pathway, and then it's back in our hand. When it is, we can play it as Darkboar Pathway if we need black mana later. So a little bit of a synergy that doesn't always come up, but any of my decks that are running pathways and bounce lands, it's worth mentioning. Temple of Milady, it's Malady of course, but Milady, comes in tapped, taps for our colors, and when it does, we scry 1. So not as much scry as Path of Ancestry can give us, as a tapped land that taps for our colors, but a guaranteed scry, even if we're not using our Path of Ancestry mana to cast our creature spells that share a type with our commander. So yeah. Finally, we have Vernal Fen here, or finally of these cards. Vernal Fen is our other typed dual. It's a swamp and a forest, and it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So we've got 18 basics in this deck. We've got a pretty good chance of this coming in untapped. But even if it comes in tapped, or comes in tapped from us finding it with Binding the Old Gods, or with Farseek, that's still fine. As for upgrades, you could upgrade our Vernal Fen to Deathcap Glade, which is a slow land. It's more likely to come in untapped that way. Could upgrade, Riveteer's Outlook to Fabled Passage if you want to have the ability to fetch a basic and have it come in untapped, or have the ability for it to maybe come in untapped. You could take this Bicycle land and switch it out for Overgrown Tomb, the shock land. So much more likely for it to come in untapped because Festering Thicket can't at all. And of course, we have the Temple of Malady, which we could switch over to Underground Mortuary, the Surveil land, since Surveil is a little bit nicer. And of course, that's a tapped land, or a typed land that we would be able to fetch up with Farseek or Binding the Old Gods. Finally, we have these utility lands. Bonder's Enclave comes in untapped and taps for colorless, or we can pay 3 and tap it and draw a card if we control a creature with power 4 or greater. So this is just if we need more card advantage, which we generally don't in this deck because we're killing a lot of things and our commander's triggering a lot. But in case we do need card advantage, as long as we've got our commander in play, we can pay 3 and tap this to get a card. Daily Bugle Building is a new Spider-Man land, of course. It comes in untapped, taps for colorless. We can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color, which is to say can filter. Or we have Smear Campaign, 1 and tap to make target legendary creature have menace until end of turn, but only as a sorcery. So a little tiny bit of evasion for us, for our commander, if we happen to need it. I run Demolition Field as my only answer to lands. I know that mass land disruption is something people don't like, obviously, and targeted land disruption is a little hinky sometimes, depending on what your pod feels like. But having a single source in your 100-card deck of dealing with a Glacial Chasm, dealing with a Maze of Ith, something that's a dangerous land, I don't know why people would complain about Gaia's Cradle, being removed. But in any case, having a way to deal with a problematic land is worth it, especially in this form. Demolition Field comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls. They get to go find a basic and put it into play untapped, and so do we. So neither of us are down a land, we just have basics instead of these non-basics, whatever theirs was that was problematic, and our Demolition Field. The only way this does not end up with us having the same number of lands that we started with is if one of us, or I guess both of us, doesn't have any basics left. Detection Tower is a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, and if we pay 1 and tap it, until end of turn, our opponents and their creatures that have hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities we control as though they didn't have hexproof. So this gets around hexproof. Doesn't get through Shroud, doesn't get through Ward, only hexproof, but worth doing. Sometimes we need to target an opponent to make them sacrifice their biggest creature. Sometimes we need to just fell a creature. Detection Tower gets around those creatures and opponents who somehow get hexproof. Mosswarp Bridge is next. This is a land with Hideaway 4, much like we saw Fight Rigging have Hideaway 5. So when the land comes in, again, we look at the top 4 of our library, exile 1 face down under Mosswarp Bridge, put the others on the bottom in a random order. Mosswarp Bridge itself comes in tapped, and taps for green, and if we pay a green and tap it, we can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if the creatures we control have total power 10 or greater. So it cares about power. There's a pretty good chance that our commander is going to just have power 10 or greater. And if it does, we're going to be able to cast for almost free the spell that's under Mosswarp Bridge. It just costs paying a green and tapping the bridge. Reliquary Tower is in this because we draw a lot of cards from Kraven. It gives us no maximum hand size, comes in untapped, taps for colorless. Just untapped land that helps us out that way. And then finally, because we do want to try and win with commander damage, if we can, we have Rogue's Passage. Comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable until end of turn. That does not have to be our own creature. It just says target creature, not target creature you control. So if we wanted to use this politically, we could say, look, opponent A, if you want to attack opponent B, once you've attacked before blockers, I'll make one of your creatures unblockable. Just leave me alone this turn. A lot of times people will go for that. But yeah, much more dangerous to make their creature unblockable before they declare attackers, because then they might attack us. But usually we're going to use this for our commander to get in and try and win the game. So that about sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Spider-Man Commander decks every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops. So let me know in the comments if there's a commander you'd like to see, or a specific deck style you'd like to see me build them in. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.